Of course, I'm happy to be here with you all.
So I hinted at a bit of your personal and career journey, but I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that journey and how did you come to Out in Tech?
Yes. Well, it started off in Boston. I went from Boston to Connecticut to El Salvador in Central America, back to Chicago, and then back to Boston. The reason I got into nonprofit and social justice work to begin with was I was inspired by my mom, who over the years I've been blessed enough to see work in nonprofit and community impact. And she's always really instilled in me that if you can make a living while benefiting your community, why not? And so from a young age, that was instilled in me. And so right after college, I joined the Peace Corps, which is how I ended up in El Salvador doing youth development work there. From there, I moved back to Boston and got into a number of different nonprofit roles. So for anywhere from a therapeutic caseworker to corporate engagement. I moved to Chicago, ended up doing fundraising and communications work at a homelessness services nonprofit out there. Also got into an ed tech nonprofit, which was my foray in tech. And then somehow I came back to Boston and was able to find Out in Tech. I say it was just a lucky moment of circumstance, and I actually found the role on LinkedIn. I hear that 80% of roles that people get into come through networking. So the fact that I was able to find out about Out in Tech, talk to some friends about their experience, either attending events at Out in Tech or being involved in other ways in volunteerism. I heard great things about the organization, and it was really an opportunity for the first time for me to be able to bring my full self to work. I heard someone finishing off the last panel talking about being your authentic self. And this was the first time that I've been able to fully bring myself to work. And actually, as much as I was passionate about all of the other organizations and causes that I've worked for in the past, this was the first time that I was representing my own community, the LGBTQ plus community, through my work, which is really special. So yeah, that's how I found Out in Tech. I got to meet the team. We all clicked. And here I am almost 2 years later as the chief of staff.
Amazing. Yeah, we started today's conversation with Power to Fly CEO Milena Berry, and one of the things that Milena and Hunter were talking about is, gosh, there's so many people who they might even be out in their personal lives and are not able to bring their full selves to work, unfortunately, and just the burden and the psychological lack of safety that comes with that. So it's so great to hear that through your work, you're able to bring your own self to work, your whole self to work, and also be able to pass that on to others, which I love. And that kind of brings me to let's talk a little bit more about what the core mission of Out in Tech is. We have a big tech community here at Power to Fly, as well as a big LGBTQ tech community. So I love to hear a little bit more about how Out in Tech supports tech leaders and what impact the organization has had on its 50,000 members since its inception. Don't go through every single 50,001, but I'm sure there's some great success stories there.
Yes, yes, thank you for asking. Yeah, we do have 50,000 members. We're a global nonprofit, and so while I'm based on the East Coast in the U.S. in the Boston area, we have members worldwide. Certainly a large contingent in the United States in a lot of major cities. So New York, Boston, LA, San Francisco, Atlanta, Chicago. Some of our largest and most active chapters internationally are London, Madrid, Amsterdam. And really our goal is to help our members advance their careers, grow their networks, and leverage tech for social change. And so a few of the ways we do that is we have lots of local events in all of the chapters. We have over 30 chapters globally. So we have over 250 free events happening locally in those chapters year round. And folks can meet. Some of them are socials or networking opportunities. Some of them are more programmatically focused. So it might be a panel on innovation in tech or AI, or there might be a specific recruitment event for software engineers. It could be more identity based, where it's how do you bring your full self to work,
Mhm.
coming from an intersectional identity. So a lot of those opportunities to build community, to get folks hired, to build their network. We also have something that we're very excited about this year, which coming up in September in New York, we have our Leadership Institute. So you mentioned leaders in tech and how we're impacting folks who are kind of moving up and getting promoted, or maybe already have a leadership role. So our Leadership Institute is taking place in New York, September 12th through 14th. And it's an opportunity for folks to hone their leadership skills, build their influence. It's a cohort-based program, so people will go through the 3 days in small groups, and they'll really be able to deepen their relationships with the folks that they're following throughout the course of the conference. It's an opportunity to find mentors, to work through and problem solve any challenges folks are facing at work, to see folks who are queer and trans in the C-suite talking about their journey. So we're super excited about the Leadership Institute, and that's really an opportunity to dive in deeper with our members around growing their influence and their power. Another way that we support our community is through recruitment events. I know you mentioned Power to Fly has a fair going on later this week. We also do quarterly career fairs. We call them career talks, and we have a number of different companies that come through and are hiring, and they talk about the roles that they're promoting in their workplaces, which is really great. We also have a couple of our impact programs that I love to highlight. One is called Out in Tech U, which is a mentorship program for youth 17 to 24 who identify as LGBTQ plus or are questioning. And that's an opportunity for youth to be paired with a mentor who also identifies as queer or trans and is working in tech currently. So it's a great opportunity for young people who are maybe interested in tech or kind of don't know where to begin. We know a lot of folks who are queer or trans, oftentimes they don't have the same natural or organic supports that some of our cis straight allies and colleagues have, because maybe folks were, kicked out of their homes, or, have sort of alternative paths to career and to getting their feet set as they grow professionally. So it's a really nice way to provide some support to folks in the community, and they actually they work on with their mentor, and in addition to things like resume review and interview skills, they work on things like basically they choose a project together. So one of the projects that I love to talk about is we had a young person in the program who is non-binary and goes by they, them. And so this person wanted their parents to be able to practice using their correct pronouns. So they actually worked with their mentor to build an app where their parents could practice using the appropriate they, them pronouns. And it was something that they were able to share with a wider community, so folks can practice if pronouns are something that's newer to folks. They can do that without, offending the person whose pronouns they are talking to. So I thought that was really special and so personal to the mentee who was able to build that app. And another program that we have, another of our impact programs that I love to talk about, is our Digital Core program. So that's a program where we have quarterly hackathons to build websites for activists who live in countries where being queer or trans is criminalized. Unfortunately, there's still 70 plus countries in the world where being queer or trans is still considered criminal. And so we, through this program, are able to pair up with folks who have grassroots organizations and are looking to either build community or fundraise for their cause. Maybe it's for gender affirming care. Maybe it's for legal services for someone who is coming out as trans and might be discriminated against at work. So we're able to partner with these activists, and basically 4 times a year we build websites so that they can maintain, get their message out, and bring folks into the fold.
Wow. So much great stuff there. So many great things to impact. I just think just the idea of, and I found this throughout this week of our Pride programming, just putting the queer and trans leaders out there and hearing the stories. I think it is just great to show that kind of visibility. And we started today by even talking about that lack of queerness in the C-suite, but knowing that there are people out there that are doing it. And I think that's able to inspire the next generation. I think the same thing with mentorship, so much that you talked about, and the difficulties and hurdles that LGBTQIA plus people often have in finding a mentor that can really speak to their own experience. So I love that Out in Tech is really investing in this storytelling and this connecting. And you mentioned earlier how many jobs are found through networking and all of these different ways that you're facilitating networking. That's why you can go to the Out in Tech job fair and the Power to Fly job fair, because
Yes.
as we kind of hinted at, there's never too much networking that you can do.
100%. Yes. Yes. And like you said, the representation, the visibility, so important. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Hmm. And you mentioned that you hinted at a few things, but I'd love to hear a little bit more ways that Out in Tech is partnering, maybe specifically with tech companies or other organizations to really further your mission to help them achieve greater diversity as well. So, how are you partnering with outside organizations and really seeing that impact then on the Out in Tech community?
Absolutely. So we have a large number of strategic partners. So we do partner with tech companies and tech, we say tech adjacent. Really everyone considers himself a tech company these days
Yes.
because we all have websites, we all have, data management, we all have UI, UX. So it's really, yeah, it's interesting how far we've come and that everyone's tech, which is great. We have over 100 strategic partners, and basically they work with us throughout the year in a variety of different ways. So they can, sponsor events with us. They can host recruitment events, as I mentioned, some of those panels, whether it's on mental health or AI or other topics. They can bring folks into their offices and host those. We have a number of virtual events. We do one of my favorite events that we run is a virtual event. It happened this past March. It's called Queer Women of Color Paths to Power. And so we really are highlighting intersectionalities, highlighting some of the most underrepresented, most marginalized folks in tech, and bringing, highlighting voices, bringing voices to the table so that folks can hear kind of what, you can only be what you can see, quote unquote, but also, like you said, the visibility and the representation is so important because we do have, a lot of trans folks, a lot of queer folks, a lot of women of color, in our community, and being able to see folks who have had success in their roles getting to the C-suite, as you mentioned, is so powerful. So that's, one of my favorite events that we've been hosting the last couple of years. And in addition to that, we also have educational workshops that we run. So it can be on, trans inclusivity, on LGBTQ rights, on allyship, how to be a better ally in the workplace. So we have a number of educational opportunities that our partners are able to opt into as well. And then we're always looking for volunteers. So I mentioned the digital core hackathons and the website building for some of these grassroots international nonprofits. We talked about our Out in Tech U mentorship program. We're always looking for folks throughout the year to volunteer as mentors, to volunteer at our hackathons. The hackathons are not only for people with specific hard tech skills. If you're a project manager or you are in communications, we need also a little bit of everything to help these activists build out their websites. So more information about that on our website at outintech.com. But yeah, these are opportunities for partners to hear more about our work, build more inclusive spaces within the workplace for queer and trans folks. That's really, what we're looking to do, get folks hired, and also retain the talent that they have, right? So if they have folks who identify as queer or trans or from any underrepresented community, whether it's people of color or people with disabilities, we want to ensure that those folks are able to stay in a workspace where they feel comfortable, where they feel like they can bring their full self, hopefully, or as much of their self as they feel comfortable with. And we want to support companies in creating that space for our community.
I think that's such a great point because there is so much focus on the hiring aspect, but not always the same focus on the retention aspect. And that can take the forms of making sure you have your Pride employee resource group, are your benefits LGBTQ plus forward benefits as well. So I love that you're also focusing on that. And I think it's great that not only are you looking to uplift the queer community, but also bring the allies into the conversation, because at the end of the day, the change that we need to see happen is not going to happen unless we're also getting that buy-in, often from folks that are outside of the community. So I love even just going back to that app that you mentioned that one of your members created. It's all about just furthering that acceptance, that spreading that education, bringing the allies in. So I love, Marissa, that that's part of the mission as well.
Thank you.
And I'd love just to also focus a little bit on some of maybe the challenges. I started my career also in the nonprofit world, so I know it can be a challenging space right now, especially with some of the pushback that LGBTQ efforts are getting across the nation and the world, as you mentioned as well. So I'd love to hear any of the unique challenges that out in tech, or really LGBTQIA plus nonprofits in as a whole might be facing today.
Yes, great question. And unfortunately, there are a few challenges. Certainly, as you mentioned, some of the pushback, the discriminatory practices and laws that are being passed right now in our own country, as you mentioned, means that there is a greater need for our work. And so just knowing that there's a need that in itself with limited resources poses a challenge. Some local governments are being more restrictive. I have a good friend who is a pediatrician out in Oklahoma, and she was telling me how they had an adolescent department in the hospital where she works, and because of some of the anti-trans and some of the restrictions now on gender affirming care in Oklahoma specifically, the entire adolescent department disbanded. And so
Mm.
anybody who was working as a physician in adolescent care in that specific hospital in Oklahoma, they're leaving the state. And so that just goes to show like this is, really hitting people, very literally in their local communities, which is, frightening and, very harmful, of course, to our trans, trans youth and all trans folks. So just something to keep our eye on. And then also just threats. I'm going to Pride in New York this weekend. I'm based in the Boston area, but going to Pride, and I was seeing articles about how there are threats of terrorist attacks on Pride events, and that just is so alarming, and not something that we want to be seeing or hearing about, or experiencing. So that certainly is a challenge. Not to be a downer, but it's the reality. And another thing that just very specifically I like to point out is just data protection in general. So say for example you're on a dating app in another country where we mentioned there's certain countries where even more so than our own country, being queer or trans is criminalized, right? And so if you live in one of those countries, Somalia, Uganda, for example, and there are major threats if people find out that you are part of the queer trans community. Say you're on a dating app and there's a data breach, right? And then
Mhm.
you didn't want to be out to your community, to your family, to the police, and now they have access to the fact that you are queer or trans. So just data protection in general is so important. I also think about health data and health insurance. Say you're HIV positive, and that's not something that you want the general public to know about, or maybe you'll be discriminated against at work if that comes out, and there could be a data breach. So just data protection is something that we, especially being in tech, it's something that we are, keeping top of mind and wanting to make sure, especially for the queer and trans community, that that's something that it remains protected information, especially if it could be personally harmful to folks.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I guess on a more positive note, I know we're talking about challenges, but just overall, you mentioned representation. We talked about visibility earlier, and something that we want to see out in tech, and I'm sure you at Power to Fly also want to see, and many other folks want to see, is just greater representation at all levels, right?
Mhm.
from the LGBTQ community, whether it's from, we talk about from intern to CEO at Out in Tech. We want to see people at all levels in all types of organizations representing the queer and trans communities, people who are coming from, you know, vulnerable and marginalized demographics. We want to make sure folks have not just a seat, but a voice at the table, especially because tech, you know, the tech sector, we mentioned earlier too, that tech is kind of, it's everywhere now. It's in, you know, we all use it very, very often, probably more often than we would like every day. We're dependent upon it, but it's also just such an influential and powerful sector that we want to make sure that people from historically marginalized demographics now have a voice and have that influence so that we can make sure we're going down the right path, because that power and that influence can be used for good or for evil. You know, a major conversation now that I'm sure we're all aware of about AI and how we're using AI and who's making those decisions. So we as Out in Tech want to make sure that we have queer and trans people in that room making those decisions so that we can look at things like, you know, safety and how we can lift up our community.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think the good thing with AI is as quickly as it's advancing, we're still in the relatively early stages. So now is the time to get those diverse voices in the room and to really help shape that product with the data that's going into it. And so many, we actually were talking about earlier this week, if you give an AI a prompt, tell me a story about a married couple, it's going to be a man and a woman. So, and that all can easily be changed if we're getting the right input in there and also feeding it the correct data or wider data, I should say. So I love that you're raising all these things right now. And also on the Pride front, I've attended a whole bunch of local prides this year. The nice thing is I've seen that there are the naysayers or the people that are hateful are often the loudest people, but they're a small group of people. And luckily I have seen whole communities come together, and communities that you wouldn't always expect to be coming together, really embracing each other around this time of year, but also hopefully with like the work that Out in Tech is doing, that it isn't just something that we're observing in June, but it's something that we're doing 365 days of the year. And on that point, what is some action steps that companies can do, like starting tomorrow, right, to make a more inclusive work environment?
Yes, I'm so glad. I love this question. I'm so glad you're asking it. So I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that companies can do. I think, you know, we talk about wanting to hire and retain queer and trans talent, folks who identify as LGBTQ plus. So I think it starts from the job description, right? Like I think you can be as explicit in a job description as even mentioning, you know, we encourage or highly encourage folks who identify as LGBTQ plus. We encourage people who identify as people of color, people with disabilities to apply, and just be explicit. And that signals to a person who might not know, oh, is this a place that's going to be accepting of me? It's a signal to them that yes, in fact, they're making an effort as a company to want to include, you know, folks like me, which I think is very important. I would also say, you know, including folks from underrepresented groups in the interview process itself. So for example, you know, employee resource groups, ERGs, if you have an ERG, that's a Pride ERG or a Black at X company ERG, you know, invite some of those folks to be a part of the interview process so that they can weigh in and have a voice in terms of who you're hiring in certain roles within the company. And on the ERG front, I would say have and fund ERGs. I think ERGs are really, you know, an opportunity for communities, ERGs or affinity groups to build a sense of community, to feel like they belong at work. I think that sense of belonging at work is so important, and not only just so people feel good, but they're actually going to do better work if they feel that sense of community, they feel supported. They're not looking over their shoulder. That's just going to empower them to do that much better in their role. So those are some ways. I'd also say, health insurance is huge, especially for the trans community. So
Yes.
if your company can offer health insurance plans, that are include, not if, hopefully your company is offering a health insurance plan that includes gender affirming care and being explicit about that. So even within the interview process, calling that out, even if someone's not, identifying as trans, just, again, encouraging allyship, encouraging folks to be aware that this is an inclusive culture, that the company is actually, walking, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And then I'd say some other that are maybe a little bit more, I don't know if I want to say easy, but just straightforward, are, things like putting your pronouns in an email signature so that folks know that that's something, if someone uses they, them pronouns, or someone's pronouns have changed, just showing that that's something that someone, if I were to use they, them pronouns, I wouldn't have to feel like, oh, I have to be the only one kind of calling out that my pronouns are they, them. If everyone else has pronouns available and visible, then that just signals that that's something that, we all know and can make sure that we're referring to folks with using the proper pronouns. And then another one that I would encourage is all gender bathrooms. So
Yes.
folks who are do identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming, or are transitioning, for example, they don't have to sort of play that mind calculus of where to go and feel, again, that sense of inclusion and belonging within the workspace.
Totally agree. Yeah, and what we like to say here is all these things are a two-way street conversation. So if you are applying to a role and you don't see some of the benefits that that company would apply to you, when you're in the interview process, bring that up, because that also shows that you have done your homework and you have looked at what they are doing, or if they don't have all their pronouns listed in their signatures, maybe that's even something that you want to bring up, because it really is showing you that you're investing in your research into that company. So it is a two-way conversation there. And while we wrap up our conversation, Marissa, I just love for you to share, where else can people find out more about Out in Tech, get in touch with you, get involved, all that good stuff.
Yes, thank you so much for asking. And thank you for being in conversation, Rob. This was really lovely. I appreciate you and Power to Fly for inviting me to speak. So yeah, I would say certainly outintech.com is a great place to check out more about what we have to offer, whether it's partnerships, if you want to volunteer, if you want to join our membership or our Slack, you can do that all at outintech.com. And yeah, I would say, just another plug for our Leadership Institute, September 12th through 14th. We're super excited to have folks joining in New York for some in-person time and an opportunity to hear from some fabulous speakers, meet some folks who are influential in the industry, grow your network. And yeah, I will be there. Our whole staff will be there. So we're looking forward to meeting folks and hope to have more of y'all joining.
Well, thank you so much, Marissa. I'm in New York, so I want to check it out as well. Thank you again for your time. Everyone, check Out in Tech. Have a great rest of your Pride Month, Marissa, and I'm gonna send things back over to you, Hunter.
Thanks, Marissa. I'm also in New York, so I'll see you there. And actually, I went to one of your mixers recently and I made some great connections. I did the Out in Tech Queer Consulting Start Out menagerie that you did. That was a really fun one.
I love that. Thank you for joining.
Of course. And I'm a big fan of the Slack channel, so plug for that. Yeah, I'll see you on the Slacks. Thanks, Marissa.
Thank you all. Appreciate it, Rob.